Clerk will read the caption to a group of privileged resolutions.
Recognizing and commending Mrs. Courtney Toth on her outstanding public service. Honoring the worldwide victims of genocide and recognizing April 24, 2015 as Georgia's Day of Remembrance of the Armenian Genocide of 1915 through 1923. Honoring the life and memory of Captain Thomas J. Taylor. Recognizing Indian Springs Holiness Campground on its 125th sesquicentennial anniversary. Honoring the life and memory of Jacqueline Suzanne King. And for other purposes, that completes the reading of the privilege resolutions.
Is there objection to the adoption of the privileged resolutions? The chair hears none, and the resolutions are adopted. The chair recognizes Representative Kelly for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that the House agree to the Senate substitute on House Bill 342.
Representative Kelly moves that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 342. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 342 by Representative Kelly, the 16th, being entitled an act to amend Code Section 31-7-3.2, the official code of Georgia annotated relating to the notice of cited deficiencies and imposition of sanctions for nursing home or immediate care homes.
Chair recognizes Representative Kelly to explain the Senate substitute to House Bill 342.
House Bill 342 was passed by this House unanimously. The Senate wanted to make two small changes. First, when we're talking about the payer guidelines that wouldn't be available to be used for negligence per se charge, they wanted to say those regulations or their successor. And then the second change says that we're still allowing violations though to be admitted into evidence, but only if they're found relevant to the harm as alleged in the complaint, which I believe is a proper standard there. So I'd ask for your agreeance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 342, all those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 160, the nays are 0. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 342. The chair recognizes Chairman Jacobs for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I make a motion to agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 215.
Chairman Jacobs has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 215. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 215 by Representative Jacobs of the 80th is to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to sales and use taxes so as to provide for an additional exemption to the ceiling on local sales and use taxes.
Chair recognizes Chairman Jacobs to explain the Senate substitute.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This is the Senate substitute to House Bill 215. This is the bill that fixes the structural problems with the homestead option sales tax in DeKalb County and would enable also a penny splost as part of the solution there. The only changes in the bill are really technical changes. After a Ways and Means bill leaves the House and gets over to the Senate, you tend to then hear from ACCG and the Department of Revenue with technical suggestions as to how to improve the legislation. So I received a list of technical suggestions both from ACCG and from the Department of Revenue and incorporated some of those changes into the bill, which are the substitute you have in front of you. As I've mentioned previously when I was in the well on this bill affects only DeKalb County. In addition, I can now say that it has the support of all 16 members of the House from DeKalb and all 6 senators. We have uniformly across both chambers, across both parties, supported this bill as legislators from DeKalb. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will ask for the House's favorable consideration of the motion.
On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 215, all those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines.
Y'all need to vote for this.
Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, The clerk will lock the machine. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 135, the nays are 32. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 215. The chair recognizes Representative Tom Taylor for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to agree to the Senate substitute for House Bill 520.
Is that as amended?
I'm sorry, as amended, sir.
Representative Taylor has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 520 as amended by this House. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 520 by Representative Taylor, the 79th, being titled an act to incorporate the city of La Vista Hills in DeKalb County.
Chair recognizes Representative Taylor to explain the Senate substitute and the House amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this bill originally passed out of here with 129 votes, subject to a couple of years worth of committee hearings in the Government Affairs Committee. And I want to thank particularly Representative Brockway, Representative Hamilton, Representative Fleming, Representative Mosby, folks who worked very hard on this and tried to cut a deal with this. We passed a version that out of the House that went over to the Senate, was amended in two ways. One, Senator Miller had a precinct that wanted to come into a large number of the folks in that precinct wanted to come into the city of La Vista Hills. That was amended. We're talking about 1,900 people. Representative Jacobs and I supervised a poll over the weekend on March 28th, 29th, and 30th that did about 900 calls in that area, virtually every phone number. About 60% or almost 2/3 of the folks in that area surveyed wanted to come in to La Vista Hills. I know the hour is late, and this is a DeKalb County bill. Also, there was another amendment by Senator Parent, which took out a couple of streets in a neighborhood that was divided. This was not in dispute at all, and all parties agreed to that. Looking for your favorable support on this. It's been through the ringer. At the end of the day, again, this doesn't create a city. What it does create is the opportunity on these folks to finally get a vote on this this November and basically weigh in on whether they want to incorporate or remain unincorporated DeKalb. You'll hear a little bit from the opposition, I think, on this. There's been some folks working the lines that there's a lot of commercial that came in with this particular change, the one precinct. Basically, what is in that one precinct that came in is about 1,900 to 2,000 individuals, and the only commercial that came in was one Quick Trip. I urge you to give the voters there a chance and positively vote for this bill. I'll be glad to take any questions, Mr. Speaker.
You have a number of questions.
Sure.
Chair recognizes Representative Brockway to your right for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Representative Taylor, you know my fondness and friendship with you, as you know, I chaired a subcommittee that attempted to bring peace to this area and draw a line that would be mutually agreeable to the folks in La Vista Hills and Tucker. And as you know, Senator Miller made changes to that he had the right to do. And so I suppose it's more of a statement, but isn't it true that despite my fondness for you, I'll have to vote against your motion here today?
And I bear you no ill will for that.
Thank you, sir.
You have other questions. Do you continue to yield?
Yes, sir.
Chair recognizes Representative Oliver to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Setting aside the issue of friendship, wasn't I paid and Brockway, Representative Brockway and Representative Mosby and 4 or 5 other House members paid a per diem to come to the House in December to resolve the dispute between La Vista and Tucker, and weren't we paid that per diem to set it in stone what the border would be? And further, sir, Isn't it true that the House knows better than the Senate about where the border should be in a district that we represent and not them?
I do not disagree with the fact that it came out of the House committee one way, went over to the Senate, and came back a different animal, but that is where we are now. This has been in process for a long time, and at the end of the day, I want to give the people in this area a chance to vote on it, whether they want to be in it or not.
Chair recognizes Representative Holcomb to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Isn't it true that you and Representative Jacobs, in a press release last August, announced the process by which the border between Tucker and La Vista Hills would be resolved?
That's true.
And isn't it true that through that process it encouraged the groups to get together to mediate and try to resolve the difference, and if that weren't to occur, that there would be a follow-on subcommittee that would arbitrate the dispute?
That's correct.
And isn't it true that I participated in that mediation and worked with the groups, and one of the groups expressed a lot of concern that if they reached an agreement, it could be unwound in the Senate?
That's correct, sir.
And isn't it further true that then there was in fact a House subcommittee that was chaired by Representative Brockway, and there was a lot of work that was done through a transparent process, an inclusive process, a public process, and then as a result of this, there was a map that was put forth for the resolution of this issue between Tucker and La Vista Hills?
That is correct, and I do appreciate the work of that subcommittee.
And isn't it further true that on day 33, across the hall in the Senate, in a subcommittee or in a committee meeting, without previously being presented to the public, a different map was presented, and it was only revealed to the public after a vote was taken, changing the borders of these two areas?
What I recall is that in the Senate committee, they changed it. The Senate committee, the SLOGO, voted to approve that map presented by Senator Miller.
And isn't it further true that you conducted a poll in the district that I represent over the last 3 days without giving me the courtesy of a heads up that you were doing this, which is probably unprecedented in the history of this body, and that poll was problematic because it did not bother to ask if anybody had a preference of no city, which, as you're well aware, what we're doing here is putting forward to the voters an opportunity for a referendum so they could choose between a city and no city.
Actually, the no preference was 37 responses out of the several hundred calls, which amounted to 19%.
Well, no preference is different than no city in terms of a question. And finally, isn't it true that if you and Representative Jacobs were just going to conduct a telephone poll to resolve this, we could have saved a lot of time and energy by a lot of members?
At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is give these folks a chance to vote. This has been here for a couple of years in front of this body. My commitment to everybody in this room is if you vote this out, this will be the last you'll see of this issue, period, forever.
Chair recognizes Chairman McCall to your right for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my hog hunting buddy yield, please, sir?
Yes, sir.
Couple of questions. Number one, I'm sure most of you is trying to figure out what a country boy worried about happening in DeKalb County. But I have to commute through there. Either way, I go home.
Yes, sir.
What worries me the most is it not true that this committee that Representative Brockway and Oliver and all were on met all summer long and had agreements and input from the citizens that this affects? And is it not true that they pretty much gave their word that this is what it would be? And I don't want, is it not true, the reputation of this House to be tarnished in any way by the representatives giving their word on something, and then we go back and not do what they say they were going to be able to do.
Yes, sir. I respect the work of the committee. Like I said, we've sent a lot of things over to the Senate that come back as a completely different animal. This is very much that case, and I thank you for your question, sir.
one further question. Is it not true that when we came back after dinner break, lunch break, whatever you call it up here, the speaker was talking about how the Senate was monkeying with redistricting that the House had sent them? Is this not the same thing, that the Senate is monkeying with district lines on cities instead of representative districts? I don't get the difference.
The difference I see there is this group asked the senator who represents that area to be brought in, and he changed the borders to do that, sir. Mr. Speaker, I'll take one or two more
Chair
questions.
recognizes Representative Fleming to your left for a question.
To the gentleman in the well, is it not true that I also had the delight to serve for hours and hours and hours on this subcommittee looking at these city lines along with Representative Brockway this past year? Yes, I did.
Yes, you did, sir.
Thank you.
I wasn't sure whether you enjoyed it that much.
And is it not further true that although this is not exactly the map that committee suggested to the Senate, that the Senate has sent it back to us with basically one precinct difference? Isn't that correct?
That is correct, and a very small change on a couple of streets that were not in dispute that Senator Parent asked to be brought out because it was splitting a neighborhood. So there are actually two, but the one has never been in dispute.
To the gentleman in the well also, is it not further true that this one precinct that has basically been changed happens to belong to the senator that represents this area? Is that not true?
That is correct, sir.
And is it not further true that although hours and hours have been spent trying to mold something that makes everybody happy, that sometimes around here that is impossible, and occasionally we have to compromise slightly to get something ended? Is that not true?
That is true, sir.
To the gentleman in the well, finally, last question. Is it not true, if my colleagues will please vote for this map, that the Senate has agreed to accept it and we can be done finally with one more DeKalb issue?
Thank you, sir. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask for favorable consideration. I will yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. What purpose does Chairman Jacobs rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr.
State your inquiry.
Because there were a couple of different versions of the amendment on everyone's desks because of a Scrivener's error, is it not true that the amendment we are voting on as part of this motion is AM 281444?
That is the understanding of the chair. Okay. First of all, is there any objection to the adoption of the House amendment? Is there objection? There is objection. There is objection. Does the gentleman move? The gentleman moves. All those in favor of the House amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the adoption of the House amendment to the Senate substitute to House Bill 520, the ayes are 104, the nays are 63. The amendment has been adopted. On the gentleman's motion that the House now agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 520 as amended by this House, all those in favor of the gentleman's motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. For what purpose does Representative Oliver rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't this the simple rule here that the House Arbitration Committee that set a boundary in stone should be upheld by the House?
The lady is experienced and served on the subcommittee, and I understand today got a per diem for that. So, what purpose does Chairman Earhart rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it true that the House just upheld its own interest with 105 votes?
I'm sure the gentleman believes that to be true. Okay. All those were voting. Did you unlock the machine? You did. Okay. Why don't you ring the bell, Mr. Clerk? All those in favor of the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute as amended by this House are voting aye. Those who are opposed to the gentleman's motion are voting no. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the gentleman's motion. The ayes are 62. The nays are 106. The gentleman's motion has failed. Has disagreed. Puts us in a disagree posture. What purpose does Representative Taylor rise? What purpose does Representative Taylor rise?
Make a motion.
State your motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House reconsider House Bill 520, Senate, as amended by the Senate.
Representative Taylor has moved that this House reconsider its failure to approve his motion that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 520 as amended by this House. Is there objection to the motion? Is there objection? There is objection. Does the gentleman move? Gentleman moves. All those in favor of the motion for reconsideration will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Taylor rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that this is DeKalb County? This is a county I live in. These are folks that are asking to distance themselves from a frankly dysfunctional and in fact corrupt government. Is it not true, sir?
I think the gentleman believes in that which he has stated. What purpose does Representative Fleming rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that unless we vote yes to reconsider, that we have indeed amended this bill and we have disagreed with the Senate changes, and we will send back to the Senate a House bill which contains the amendment that Representative Taylor wanted to start with?
That is correct. All right, we're voting. We are voting. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Have all members now voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 82, the nays are 84. This House has chosen not to reconsider its action. What purpose does Representative Mitchell rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a motion.
State your motion.
I move that we take House Bill 515 off the table.
Representative Mitchell moves that House Bill 515, which was tabled a few days ago, be removed from the table. Is there objection? Is there objection? There is objection. Does the gentleman move? The gentleman moves. All those in favor of the motion to remove House Bill 515 from the table will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion to remove House Bill 515 from the table, the ayes are 88, the nays are 75, and House Bill 515 is off the table. Chair recognizes Representative Mitchell for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that we disagree with the Senate amendment to House Bill 515.
I mean the Senate substitute. Representative Mitchell has moved that this House disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 515. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 515 by Representative Mitchell, the 88th, to be entitled an act to incorporate the city of Tucker into Cobb County.
Chair recognizes Representative Mitchell to explain the Senate substitute.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I don't want to belabor the point. This bill simply would place formally into law what most of us here commonly thought was the case in any event. Don't want to, as I said, belabor the issues, but as you know, there was a committee put together. It worked all summer, even through Thanksgiving, to come up with the borders. This House overwhelmingly passed that bill, went over to the Senate. It's my understanding one senator, at the last minute, revealed the boundaries after the vote was taken to amend this bill. And as was stated earlier, there was a press release published in our local papers by proposers of another boundary, and I'd like to just read you a couple of sentences. If an agreement cannot be reached by that date, House Governmental Affairs Committee Chair will appoint a 5-state House members committee to carry out the task of drawing city boundaries for the proposed cities. The panel's sole charge will be to produce a boundary map no later than December 31st by majority vote of the panel. Either the agreed upon map by cityhood proponents or the map drawn by the legislative panel will be the only acceptable version that the House Government Affairs Committee will consider. We voted that out of here as overwhelmingly, and I would ask that you disagree with the Senate substitute and go with the wisdom of this House. I'll yield for questions, Mr. Speaker.
You don't appear to have any questions.
I ask for your favorable disapproval of the Senate substitute.
What purpose does Chairman Reinders rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that if we agree to disagree with the Senate, then we go to conference to end the dispute on the precinct that was debated both in the last bill and in this bill? So we need a yes vote to disagree to go to conference. Is that not correct, Mr. Speaker?
That is the chair's understanding. On the gentleman's motion that this House disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 515, is there objection? Is there objection? State your inquiry. What purpose does Chairman Martin rise?
A parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that if the gentleman moved to disagree, that if there's not objection to that disagreement, haven't we taken the position forward, then the House has disagreed and it would not take an affirmative vote of 91 because this is not a vote to pass the bill?
That's correct.
So if there's not objection to disagreeing, then the House would have disagreed. Is that not true?
That's correct.
Thank you.
That's what I'm trying to determine. If there is a...
I thought, my apologies, Mr. I thought we were headed to a vote.
No. Not unless there's objection. Okay, let me start over now. On the gentleman's motion that the House disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 515, is there objection? The chair hears no objection. This House has disagreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 515. Chair recognizes Chairman Weldon for a motion. But before I do, does this have anything to do with DeKalb County? Hearing that it does not, Chair recognizes Chairman Weldon for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that we agree with the Senate substitute to House Bill 153. There was only some minor modifications to the bill that this House passed, and I ask that we agree to the Senate substitute.
Chairman Weldon has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 153. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 153 by Representative Weldon III to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 19 in Title 15 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to the regulation of the practice of law.
Chair recognizes Chairman Weldon to explain the Senate substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Senate substitute made some minor modifications on line 14. They added the language after the word property or the employee of a seller of real property. On line 20, they, after the word attorney, added the language in connection with, and then goes on the listing price for those who are involved in the real estate transactions. On the second page, the end of line 29, the first part of line 30, which requires that an attorney, an active member in good standing of the State Bar of Georgia, and then on line 33 and 34 just makes provisions for banks to be able to do things that's incidental to banks, title agencies to do things that are incidental to them doing their business, and clerical services to attorneys. That's really all it is. It's not very substantive issues, and I'd ask for favorable consideration. Any questions, Mr. Speaker? I'll yield.
You have no questions.
Thank you for your favorable consideration.
On the gentleman's motion that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 153. All those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 168, the nays are 1. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 153. Chair recognizes Representative Dickey for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House agree with the Senate substitute to HB 313.
Representative Dickey has moved that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 313. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 313 by Representative Dickey of the 140th be titled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 20 of Title 45 of the Official Georgia Code of Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to leaves of absence for certain public employees.
Chair recognizes Representative Dickey to explain the Senate substitute to House Bill 313.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Senate just added 2 lines of additional language to clarify that this additional leave would only be used for educational purposes and not for political purposes. If there's no other questions, I'll yield the well.
You have no questions.
I ask for a positive vote. Thank you.
On the gentleman's motion, that this House agree to the Senate substitute, House Bill 313, all those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 171, the nays are 1. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 313. Chair recognizes Representative F. Strachan for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House accept the Senate substitute to House Bill 328. Thank you.
Representative F. Strachan has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 328. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 328 by Representative F. Strachan of the 104th to be titled an act to amend Part 2 of Article 15 of Chapter 1 and Title 10, Code Section 17-10-7 and 42-9-45, Chapter 1 of Title 43, and Code Section 49-4-15 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to the Fair Business Practices Act of 1975.
Chair recognizes Representative F. Strachan to explain the Senate substitute to House Bill 328.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I bring back before you a portion of criminal justice reform from this year. House Bill 328 passed this body unanimously earlier this month. As it returns from the Senate, additional language was added to Section 1 concerning reporting agencies as far as criminal histories. This is to ensure accuracy and also consistency with federal laws and regulations so that is consistent. Additionally, there is additions in 2 sections for parameters to be set for the Council of Accountability Court judges for the state of Georgia. And this is consistent with the principles of criminal justice reform, allowing for regulation oversight to be in place for our accountability courts that we now have in the state. I'd ask that this body agree to the Senate substitute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll yield for questions if there are any.
You have no questions.
I'll yield the well. Thank you.
On the gentleman's motion that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 328, all those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 165, the nays are 1. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 328. Chair recognizes Representative Jaspers for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that we agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 492.
Representative Jaspers has moved that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 492. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 492 by Representative Jaspers to the 11th to be titled an act to amend Chapter 11 and Title 16 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to offenses against public order and safety, so as to revise provisions regarding carrying in unauthorized locations.
Chair recognizes Representative Jaspers to explain the Senate substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pretty simple change in 492 that we passed earlier, almost unanimously. We took out part of my bill and added a section from Senate Bill 141 from Senator Emanuel Jones. And what this addition does, it makes no changes in the treatment of adults in the school safety zone, but what it does, it treats those juveniles who bring a firearm, a dangerous weapon, like a machine gun or any of that kind of stuff, together with an assault to continue to be charged with a felony, as they are today. Other weapons charges will be non-criminal and dealt with by the school system. It's a process that's in Title 20 currently. So the plastic knife in the backpack will be dealt with by the school system. This will provide a second chance for students who have minor offenses who are also ensuring their schools are maintained safely. It also adds in Section 7, when you look through it, that adds ammunition where a firearm can be taken, and in 3 other sections, they're just cleanups from House Bill 60. That's it. Are there any questions, Mr. Speaker?
You have no questions.
Well, I yield the well.
On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 492, all those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 150, the nays are 15, and this House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 492. Chair recognizes Chairman Cooper for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree. I move that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 505.
Chairman Cooper moves that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 505. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 505 by Representative Cooper, the 43rd, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 33 of Title 43 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to physical therapists.
Chair recognizes Chairman Cooper to explain the Senate substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the physical therapy bill. The Senate added that they must graduate from an accredited school, and on the very last page, they added that the provision of this code section shall not prevent any other health care provider from administering techniques authorized within his or her scope of practice. So I would ask your favorable consideration. Thank you.
On the lady's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 505, all those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the lady's motion, the ayes are 166, the nays are 0. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 505. what purpose does Representative Raffensperger rise?
To make a motion?
You will need to make that from the well.
Yes, sir.
Chair recognizes Representative Raffensperger for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to agree to agree to Senate substitute to House Bill 432.
Representative Raffensperger has moved that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 432. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 432 by Representative Raffensperger, the 50th to be titled an act to amend Chapter 36 and Title 36 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to annexation of territory by municipal corporations.
Chair recognizes Representative Raffensperger to explain the Senate substitute.
This is relatively simple and straightforward. They added a section that just said this act shall become effective upon its approval by the governor or upon its becoming law without such approval. If there are no questions, I yield the well.
Representative, you have no questions. Representative Raffensperger has agreed that this House has moved that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 432. All those in favor of the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 168, the nays are 0. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 432. Okay, here's what our posture we're in. We're going to take a dinner recess. And it's the chair's understanding that the transportation conferees are getting very, very close to an agreement that that we will take up hopefully tonight. In the meantime, we will line up some other agree-disagrees. We've been moving them out today. So we're going to be in a dinner break until 7:45. 7:45.